I was asked to speak briefly on leadership and succession. First of all, I would like to thank all of the devotees who are participating in this program. Of course, Dhanvantari Swami, I believe, is hosting it, and I'm sure Prabhupada is pleased and grateful to all of you for your very sincere and devoted interest in preserving ISKCON through appropriate, efficient, and Krishna-conscious leadership and succession. So I'm going to discuss a few topics which are a little challenging, rather than just say all the platitudes that sometimes are said. If we look at the system that Krishna himself created for leadership, which is called Chaturvarnyam. Of course, Chaturvarnyam is not only a leadership, the system of Varna is not only a leadership structure, but it's a structure for all society. But in that structure, there are two Varnas in particularly, Brahmins and Kshatriyas, who are clearly leaders. And this divine system, which Krishna himself created, and which is mentioned in the Rig Veda and throughout Shastra, presents a balance between the two primary powers. There's the spiritual, intellectual, you could say moral power of the Brahmana, and the administrative and political and military power of the Kshatriya. Now, as we know in ISKCON, we don't have Kshatriyas that can ride off on horses and cut people's heads off. But we do have leaders that can impose very painful penalties on people, such as ostracizing them from our society, removing them from positions, humiliating them, and which Krishna says is worse than death. So the Brahma Tejas, this power of our leaders, is significant. Now, what I find significant about Krishna's system is that there is a balance of power. The two greatest powers, Brahmas and Kshatriyas, balance each other. And the real challenge for ISKCON is that it's not clear if we have that balance. As they say, power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. So on the one hand, we have the real world, the laws of nature. The fact that power corrupts, the fact that Krishna himself instituted a balance of power. On the other hand, we have the fact that Prabhupada clearly mandated a system in which there's one supreme power, namely the GBC. Of course, if we look clearly at Prabhupada's will, Prabhupada actually said the ultimate managing authority. Now, we can trace the history of the way Prabhupada talked about the GBC, and we can trace the history of the way Prabhupada talked about other powers in ISKCON. For example, one interesting point I find is that there's a statement from Prabhupada quoted by the GBC in their paper explaining the GBC's ultimate managing authority, in which Prabhupada says there's GBC, beneath them there's temple presidents, and then, vice president or secretary, treasurer, so on. And the paper then says that gurus are not placed in this hierarchy because there were no other gurus besides Prabhupada. I pointed out in a paper I wrote, which is some people have read, that there were sannyasis in ISKCON at that time. When Prabhupada made that statement, there were actually many sannyasis. And yet Prabhupada also did not place them within that hierarchy, within that managerial hierarchy. Another point is that in the GBC paper, they very often use the language of above and below, that the GBC is above everyone else. And The devotees are under. Actually, they use the word above and under. They use that a lot, that people are under the GBC. What's interesting is I did not find that language in Prabhupada's teachings. I actually went through Vedabase. I looked, and I didn't find Prabhupada using that way of talking, that this group is under that group. And at the same time, clearly there are real dangers in having any group of leaders, let's say gurus, who are not in some way regulated. There is a popular misconception that in Hinduism or quote-unquote Vedic culture, which frankly are the same thing for many people, unfortunately, but that in this Vedic system, the guru is an absolute figure and no one can say anything to the guru. In fact, that we got that advice from one of Prabhupada's very senior god brothers after Prabhupada disappeared, passed away. And a few months later, at the first GBC meeting in Prabhupada's physical absence, one of Prabhupada's very well-known god brothers advised us that the GBC cannot be over the guru, and the guru, no one can be over the guru. And that, of course, was a huge influence in establishing what became popularly known as the zonal acharya system. Actually, Vedic culture is not like that. The guru is not absolute. The guru has a lot of authority with his disciple, but the guru operates also within rules, within laws, within cultural laws, and even, you could say, political laws. For example, Prabhupada says in an Isa Upanishad purport that because there is not proper government, so many bogus gurus are running rampant. In other words, Prabhupada is clearly indicating there that it's the duty of the government to stop bogus gurus. And so, and we know from history the obvious danger of having people with a lot of influence, either gurus or sannyasis or household or temple presidents sometime, who have either by their own charismatic personalities or the fact that they control the money in a place, who have absolute power, who have a stranglehold. I mean, I know, frankly, I won't mention names, household or temple presidents who rule, who are tyrants, absolute tyrants, in a way which it's hard to find a guru that wants to exercise that kind of power over people's lives, like, shut up, just do what I say. And so, whether it's temple presidents, whether it's a runaway, rogue GBC, whether it's a guru, a sannyasi, whether whoever it may be, anyone who exercises power in ISKCON has to somehow work under some commonly understood ultimate authority. And because we can't really have competing powers. So that's a real challenge to ISKCON. We have to be faithful to Prabhupada's system. Of course, Prabhupada said the GBC is the ultimate managing authority. Now we may say in ISKCON that implies or that entails or that also means ultimate spiritual authority, ultimate philosophical authority. And one could say in a spiritual society, how can you ultimately manage if you can't even ultimately say whether a particular philosophical statement is correct or not, whether it's bona fide or not, that one entails, implies, or requires the other. At the same time, in every religion in history, what we find is that over time, the people who are, let's say, spiritual enough to be leaders and who are good managers get power. I don't mean to say they're cheaters, I don't mean to say they're charlatans, but people do in every ISKCON often get power because they're good managers, they know how to, or they push their way in some cases, and they're spiritual enough, or they are perceived as spiritual enough to keep their position. There's the famous dichotomy of people who are religious and not spiritual. They follow lots of rules, they, and all the technical details of bhakti yoga, but they don't really come across as very spiritual in the way they treat other people. In fact, there are some people in ISKCON and every other religion on earth, who are very religious and very unspiritual sometimes in the way they bully other people, the way they treat other people. And this is not only at a GBC level, it can be at every level. It can be at a guru level. It can be at sannyasi level. And so power does corrupt. And so in a sense, when we talk about leadership and succession, it doesn't just mean keeping the lights on and, basically keeping ISKCON bona fide in the sense we're not preaching crazy ideas or Mayavadi philosophy, or we don't have leaders that have, girlfriends or boyfriends or whatever. And so, of course, that those are the basics, like, leaders that follow the principles, leaders who preach bona fide philosophy. But Prabhupada indicated to Giriraj just before Prabhupada left this world that it takes a little more. For example, now, someone has to say it. ISKCON is actually, I think, as any objective, well-trained historian would say, ISKCON is in a historical crisis, in which it's not at all clear, frankly. It's not obvious, at least by the external events, it's not obvious whether Prabhupada's Western mission is going to really survive in the way that he established it, or is it just going to become sort of like a little extra thing which is added on to what is essentially an Indian Hare Krishna movement? And by that, I certainly mean no offense against anyone. I'm certainly not criticizing or blaming people who take birth in Indian bodies who love Krishna and want to serve Krishna. They only deserve praise. Has ISKCON made the right moves? Is the leadership aware? It raises questions like, should the leaders tell the devotees that we are in a historical crisis, which we are, and to deny that is just completely ignore everything which we would call the history of religions. And should we say, well, we don't want to panic people, we don't want to disturb the devotees, we should tell everyone, like in ISKCON 50, just tell everyone that everything's great, it's never been better, it's all wonderful, and ISKCON is spreading all over the world as if it were. In other words, will optimism ultimately change history and bring success? Or do we actually have to be honest and take a good look at what's really going on? If we ask this simple question about, and this is not a criticism of any particular group, gurus, GBCs, sannyasis, it's just a question. And that is, among ISKCON leaders at all levels, what is the official plan for rebuilding the Western Hare Krishna movement? Is it just the idea that we just keep doing the same thing that basically has not worked for 40 years? Or do we really have to come up with something? What is the official plan? As far as I can tell, there is none. And so when I look at these two factors, that we actually have a historical crisis, which any historian would tell you, we actually have a historical crisis and there is no plan. It's just, we just keep doing the same thing. It'll all be all right, which of course all of Vaishnava history refutes that. Because if we look at Vaishnava history, going back as long as you want to go back, we find that acharyas and Vaishnavas constantly adjusted to changing times, and when they didn't, there were major problems. So, as leaders, to me, these are the challenges. And the challenges are, how do you avoid power corrupting? How do you avoid what sociologists call the iron law of oligarchy, which means that bodies that hold power, and ISKCON is ruled by an oligarchy, of which I'm sort of a member, and I'm not talking about the GBC, I'm not talking about ISKCON. This is just, in general, what scholars have studied all kinds of oligarchies and religious societies, political, cultural, you name it. And they call it the iron law because apparently it always happens, that oligarchies tend to gradually become more and more concerned with their own authority and having other people do what they say, rather than actually becoming most concerned with encouraging everyone, with achieving real success around the world, and so on. So these are challenges. I don't mean to say that ISKCON is failing or that ISKCON has bad leadership. I'm not saying that. I am saying that these are very serious challenges that will not go away. Krishna balanced administrative power, managerial power, and spiritual power. Prabhupada gave us a system in which it's not clear where that balance is. I'm not saying Prabhupada made a mistake. I'm not saying we certainly cannot reject Prabhupada's system, but it is very much a challenge to be faithful to Prabhupada's system and yet somehow come up with the balance without which there's going to be serious problems. Because Krishna gave the balance. And then how do we revive powerful Western Hare Krishna movement? How do we keep ourselves pure if we are leaders? Anyway, I think my time is up. I'm not presuming to give you all the answers. I suspect some things may be necessary. I think the recent GBC development for a bicameral system to develop another legislative or administrative body which worked with the GBC but doesn't really usurp GBC authority, aids the GBC and yet has significant authority. That's very positive. I think the conference that I'm addressing right now is a very positive development. There are many very encouraging developments which are going on with the GBC and other leaders. So ultimately, I think we have to be hopeful. I think a lot of things are going in the right direction, but there are very significant historical challenges, and I pray that Krishna empower you to find the solutions. So thank you very much.